Good evening. My name is Adit Anoop, and I have the pleasure of serving as the lead for ShowOHI 2024. I would like to formally welcome everyone to the showcase. Today, we come together to celebrate the power of impactful innovation in the Ohio State community. In this room and outside in the hall, we have seen firsthand the tangible results of creative problem solving and determination. From early stage hackathon projects to established startups, each success is a testament to the precision, passion, and purpose-driven work of our table presenters. Typically, applause is reserved for the very end of the event, but please join me in giving a round of applause to recognize the outstanding contributions of our table presenters. Now, let's pivot to the rest of the programming that we have planned for this evening. First, we'll have a keynote speech delivered by Shireen Agarwal, Executive Director of the Center for Software Innovation on campus. Next, we'll open voting for the Buckeye Choice Award, which is given to the best startup as voted by you all, the attendees. And then after that, also the OHI Leadership Award given to the standout student leads within the OHI program. Then we'll move to our lightning talks, short, insightful talks that will explore this year's ShowOHI theme of ethical tech development. In continuation of lightning talks, we'll have an interactive panel discussion where ethical tech development will be discussed in more detail. We'll end ShowOHI by announcing the winners of the showcase. Now, please join me in welcoming Shireen Agarwal to the stage.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see all these faces here. There's so much energy out there, which was also amazing. So as mentioned, I am the Executive Director for the Center of Software Innovation, a brand new center that is newly launched at the university. The Center for Software Innovation has a mission statement, and that statement is to equip innovators with the skills, knowledge, resources, and connections to build the future digital economy. So there's a lot in there. And just to spend a couple of minutes just talking about what that objective is, but then also tying it back to today's theme. That kind of term innovators can mean that you are deciding to build your own company. You want to build a new product within an existing company. You have an idea that you want to pursue. That kind of force for change and people that are looking to do that on campus, off campus, that encompasses the innovator part of that mission statement. The skills, so actual application, which so many of you in this room have done and are continuing to apply. Hey, I have this idea, I'm going to try something. I'm going to get out there, I'm going to learn. Knowledge, the pieces that you're actually seeking for feedback. How should I be thinking about things? What are those frameworks? How can I do better next time? Resources, which many of you I know are like actively kind of seeking out and utilizing, and connections. And that is really represented by this room today and many rooms that you're consistently in. To build, a really key part of this is all around building the digital economy. And so that goes not only for what you might say is, this feels very much like a software product. This feels like it could be a tech product. Actually, there's a really wide growing spectrum in terms of what tech and software actually applies to, and it's part of everything, increasingly so. So every industry is going to be touched even more by digital. And that just brings about some really interesting kinds of questions. What does that actually do? If we look back a little bit, and we look at kind of the history of seeing how technology has impacted things, I'm sure you all have and could have lots of interesting debates around, well, was that thing that was built, was it good? Was it ethical? Did it cause some sort of negative repercussion? Was that intended? Was that unintended? Should somebody have been more responsible? Could you have foreseen that? A whole kind of slew of questions come up. But at the same time, we can't necessarily say we have to have answers to all these questions before we start moving, because then that becomes a blocker for making progress. But there's a really interesting balance that's needed consistently between the two. How much are you stopping to think? How much are you actually making movement? So a little bit on my background. I started out my career at Intel. I worked in the finance department, but I was working primarily on what are going to be those form factors, those devices that people would use in the future that are mobile and could be in your hand and required really low power and low processing. That was before the iPhone came out, and then it was very obvious at that point. But before that, wasn't so obvious. You should definitely see some of the designs that folks came up with. So from there, I worked on a couple of early stage startups. And then I made my way to Twitter. And so if you think about Twitter, I'm sure you can imagine with today's topic, there's a lot of interesting applications of this idea of ethical technology. If you're starting at the beginning of something and you're asking yourself, like, should I build this? When it comes to something like social media, this is a public text. It doesn't seem like this is a question of ethical, non-ethical, good, bad. It's more a question of, is this going to work? Now, in other cases, you might look at something a little bit more, that feels a little bit more blatant of what the question is. So if you see a robot that's now doing a lot more human activities, you might start to ask yourself, like, is this good? Is this good for society? And start to think through some of those questions. But I'll say for my experience while I was at Twitter, and so at that time, it was called Twitter. This was 2013 to 2017. So I have kind of no opinions except for consumer opinions on the latest chapter. But during that time, if you think about kind of like what the day-to-day was, there were questions of, is it okay that somebody tweeted that? Did we expect them to do it? What about if somebody responds to someone else? Was that okay? And then also, where is your place in making that decision? There's the right to free speech. How does that apply to a private platform or then a publicly owned company? How do you have the right type of context to say whether or not this is something that is safe on a platform? All super complex, difficult questions. And the other thing that happens is you basically put something new out into the world. You have no precedent to look at to say what's going to happen. And if this happens, what do we do? You also have a very short time to actually react to it, because what you've done is created a product that is touching lots of people. And those, in this example, those tweets move really fast. So you have a very short period of time with no real prior information to be able to make a decision on whether or not you have the responsibility to take action or not. And in those types of situations, it's really important to have your own frameworks that you've put in place in your mind of how should I be thinking about things? What are the questions that I should be asking? Also very important to have people around you that are going to be asking you tough questions. Hey, this happened. Why did you do this? Or why did you not do this? And so that other piece of the community is super important. So that's kind of an example of how through the entire kind of life cycle of when you're building, and especially as you're getting to more scale or you're trying to get to traction, it's a consistent type of thing. It's not just one day or at one point in time, you're asking yourself this question around Hey, am I building the right thing? What good is this doing in the world? You actually need to consistently be looking at how it's being used. Lots of unintended ways, in some cases good, in some cases, you could say arguably not as good ways that things get used. But one of the ways that you're gonna find that out is by starting to build. Build within a community, build with a framework in mind, know what your intentions are, and then actually be applying those skills. So from Twitter, I was kind of in my transition back to Ohio, which is also where I grew up. I was at a company called Cloudera for a while, and then I joined Root Insurance, which is based in Columbus. And one of the premise areas for Root was for auto insurance, one of the, a couple of the key factors that go into how your price is determined for your insurance premium, that includes credit score and includes zip code. And so there's this question of like, is that the most applicable data that you should be using for figuring out something like what your risk is as a driver? And that was a lot of the ethos of how the founder of the company kind of thought about what problem to be solved. And from there, actually then tried to use additional data points, so off your phone, in order to kind of triangulate on what that insurance premium should be. And so now, I've made my way, I had a period of consulting, I'm at Ohio State, and I'm really excited about building out the Center for Software Innovation. And a lot of what the center is focused on is really different avenues for learning. Experiential learning, more forms of instruction, but really a lot of those premise areas are around build, but also apply those frameworks. How can you think critically? Not only at times when you actually have the time, but when you also have to make those quick decisions. What are the things that you need to be thinking through? How are there past maybe corollaries and examples that you can pull from? And that's something that through you all having exposure to each other, learning from each other, talking through, hey, I experienced this. What did you do? How did you react to this situation? That not only compounds on areas where you can say, hey, I ran into this issue, but I also ran into, hey, this is how the product ended up evolving. And it ended up being something that I either very strongly believed in or I had these kinds of questions around. Going back to that piece around the social media example, as those types of technology were being built, it wasn't really, this question at the beginning of, hey, we're really trying to create addictive behavior. But if you look at actually where the evolution landed, and there's research done on this, there's documentaries that have been done on this, part of that is also what were the incentives that were created? And you're going to have a lot of incentives that come at you from different directions. But the incentives that were also created in some of these instances were, well, how much active usage can you get to? How many minutes can somebody spend on this platform? How many hours of video can they stream? And the higher that number, the closer you got to your goal as your team. And that was your incentive. And now if you look at it in hindsight, you would say to yourself, well, 7 hours a day of streaming video, does that seem like what I really wanted to have happen? I don't know. I'm sure everybody has different opinions on that. But the incentives that you put forth within your team, the incentives that you're putting on yourself, the metrics that you're looking at, those all help to guide where you're taking the product. At the same time, there's going to be metrics that other people put on you. How much did you grow? How many users did you get? Did you make money? All of those types of things. And each of those actually reflects back into how you're building your product. And so being able to kind of look at these examples, learn from each other, those things are super important. And also, as we're building out the center, really key components of how we're thinking about what the curriculum should look like, how we're building community, how we're supporting entrepreneurship. So thank you so much for your time today, and it's been so wonderful kind of getting to see everybody and would love to meet more of you. I will now pass it back over for to introduce the next speaker.
So next up, we have our Buckeye Choice Award voting. So as mentioned before, the Buckeye Choice Award is presented to the top startup at ShowOHI as selected by you all, the event attendees. The winner and runner-up will be awarded a cash prize to further their startup. Please make your selection by visiting go.osu.edu/showvote or by scanning the QR code here. Fairness in choosing our award winner is paramount here. Voting is open to everyone here, including attendees, table presenters, and resource table presenters. Voting is not open to anyone outside of this room. Also, please only submit the form once and do not share the form to external channels. We thank you for your compliance. I hope that everyone's has gotten the chance to visit the form, and once again, the link is go.osu.edu/vote show. Thank you very much. Now we transition to the OHIO Leadership Award. I welcome to the stage OHIO Program Director Cal King to present the award.
Hello, thank you guys for coming. I'm super excited to see this crowd. This is a wonderful turnout. The projects this evening were absolutely astounding. And I want to thank Shireen for starting us off so strong. That was great. OHIO is a student org. All of our volunteers work super hard all year long to put not just this event together, but several other events, ranging from 800 folks in one ballroom to 100 folks all trying to crack cybersecurity code problems. Everybody has done an amazing job this year, and I would like it if we could give just the OHIO team a round of applause for all of their hard work. So amongst our leadership team, there's always a couple of really outstanding leaders who go above and beyond, even just volunteering for this program, which can be really demanding, but these are some of the most dedicated students. And among these leaders, there are leaders. I want to take just a moment to recognize one of our students who is going to receive a $2,000 scholarship for their participation and their outstanding leadership this year. He has done an outstanding job, not only as an event lead, but as a mentor and a guide to other students. He has proven himself to be kind, considerate, and always extremely helpful. So I would like to recognize Sharithan Gending for the outstanding.
Has done an amazing job helping lead the system.
So I'm gonna give it back to audit so we can do our talks and hopefully find out who the winner that is this evening of our tables. Has everybody gotten a chance to vote before we get rid of everything? Yeah. Okay. Audit.
Great, thank you, Kyle, and congratulations, Shretha. Now we transition to our lightning talks. Our first talk is titled AI Ethics in 7 Minutes, Basics and Best Practices, presented by Dr. Mika Elsner, Associate Professor in the Department of Linguistics. Please join me in welcoming Mika to the stage.
All right, thanks a ton. I'm really glad to be here. You can't do AI ethics in 7 minutes because you can't do anything in 7 minutes, but I'm going to do my best, possibly by talking way too fast. I'm gonna start with a kind of proof of concept idea of how a machine learning app might work. So here, because I'm a linguist, I'm from the Department of Linguistics, I'm gonna talk about speech recognition. We're gonna start with a large database of transcribed speech. We're gonna push it into a learning algorithm, and then we get a learned model that we can run on test audio, which will transcribe that audio into text. And then we deploy some kind of product, which has quality assurance people because it goes wrong, as everything always does, and they handle the angry calls from our users. And those QA people send their reports to our engineers who fix those bugs, and our system gets better and better. So, I mean, you know, around 2016, people started to look at applications like this and say, oh, actually, maybe we should think a little harder about how these work. This is a slide by Solon Barocas, which kind of shows research spiking up in this area with some high-profile failures that you probably all heard of. What I want to say here is that when a system like this fails its users, it's something like pollution coming from a more conventional industrial application, right? It is a negative consequence caused by what we're doing. We don't intend to do it, and it happens to someone else. Usually someone who can't really stop us from doing what we're doing. Kind of like, you know, pumping pollution into a river or into the air, and, you know, the people downstream of that just kind of bear the consequences. For instance, some recent papers about speech recognition. What we need to think about is this speech recognizer is not just a piece of tech. It floats in the middle of a kind of huge ocean of people. This is what Shireen was talking about with her social media as well, right? Our data comes from people talking, and people whose speech is recorded, whose speech isn't being recorded. Our recognizer gets deployed. It gets to label some kinds of things, and we make decisions based on that label. What decisions are we going to make? Who is bearing the costs of those decisions? When we are wrong, who suffers? What errors are we explicitly assessing to decide what speech recognizer to deploy? We make the number go up, we're happy. What does the number measure? Who are our QA people listening to? When they pass off errors or bug reports to our engineers, what do they prioritize for fixing? What do they say, oh, that's unavoidable? What do they say, oh, that has no influence on our bottom line? We don't care, that would hurt our profit margins, right? These are none of these are questions inherently just about the technology. You will not learn to solve these in a class on linear algebra or convex optimization, although you may use those techniques to address them. But these are problems that are social. Right, not to kind of beat you over the head with kind of numbers, but here are word error rates from speech recognizers around 2017. And we can see that Georgia, the US state, and other places in the South have higher error. The country of Scotland has higher error. Some New Zealanders, but not others. These are the kinds of things that, you know, we might see out in an ecosystem where people start complaining and say, no, this system doesn't understand me. Both explicit and implicit bias can exist at all places in this system, right? Your engineers may explicitly say, we don't care about these people, or they may just not know that people are being underserved by your app. At every stage, doing the easy, cheap thing can lead to bad consequences. It's not enough to say, well, we didn't want it to happen, therefore it's not going to happen. Or, you know, we didn't hire any racists, therefore racist outcomes will not be produced. Because you don't know where your data comes from, you're not running your metrics, and so you don't see these things. This is not really a surprise, right? If someone says we're going to build a big power plant and we're going to figure out how to deal with pollution once we get the plant up and running, you're like, no, don't build that near my house, right? If you're in software one and you're like, I'm going to write my code, and then when it works, I'm going to, you know, put in modules and comments and, you know, make it all clean and reusable, you're going to say, no, obviously we need to do the design first, or we're never going to have a design. And similarly, engineers who don't think about ethical problems at every stage of design end up with ethical problems that are extremely difficult to fix. In the same way that engineers who don't think about software engineering end up with spaghetti code that they're then going to have to rebuild from the ground up. This is only a 7-minute talk. There is a whole field of technical and social solutions I could be talking about, but what I'm going to try to sell you on tonight is just awareness, keeping your eyes open. literacy. Developers should have some idea of what stakeholders, what people are involved in the technology they're building, and consider, is the system making decisions on behalf of people? Is it representing people in particular ways? Those people deserve a seat at the table somehow. You should be aware of the history of the communities you're working with, right? If you don't know what racism is or what sexism is, or if you're working in India or in Singapore, there are different issues over there. If you have some idea of who your stakeholders are, you know what history you need to learn. And finally, you should have some idea that your organization values ethics. Even if you don't have all the solutions, you should be able to go to your team lead and say, this is a problem that I see coming, and they should listen to you. If you are a team lead, your reports should be able to come to you and say, this is a problem, and have you say, okay, this is first-class work that we need to work on, not, oh, we're pushing that back behind whatever your goals were for this week. Get back to your desk. And the other thing that I want to sell here is transparency. Know your limits. When you build some kind of model, a model card or some similar reporting mechanism can document what is it meant for, what did we originally think it was good for, what are people using it for now, what do we know that it isn't good for, and people shouldn't use it for that. What evidence does it use to draw its conclusions? Where does its data come from? Who worked on the data? Who contributed? What do we still not know about this system? What assessments didn't we do? If you put all that out there, next to your API documents, it's easier for people who are, as Shireen again said, using your product in ways you never anticipated to see the pitfalls. There's a lot you could be reading, listening to, taking if you're an OSU student. There are more courses than this. These are just the ones I remembered off the top of my head. There are conferences and workshops for your research submissions. Again, these are not all of them. I would be really happy to talk to you more about this, but I think that's just around 7 minutes. So that's the foundations. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mika. And as you mentioned, 7 minutes obviously isn't enough time to cover the entire topic of ethical AI. But 7 minutes is enough time to motivate and enough time to inspire. So I hope all of you guys take this talk as the first step to further exploring ethical AI. Our next talk is titled Ethical Machine Learning Under Social Dynamics, and will be presented by Dr. Shreya Ruzdan, Assistant Professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Please join me in welcoming Shreya to the stage.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Shreya. As Ali mentioned, I work on the ethical and the socially responsible machine learning. And a lot of work actually is motivated by the fact that machine learning algorithms have been increasingly used in high-stake domains to make consequential decisions about humans. So here I'm not just talking about those speech recognition software that we are interacting with on a daily basis, but those very important applications that affect humans' life chances. So for example, the algorithms have been made to make decisions about who got to have the opportunity for the higher education, right? And for the defendant, how long should we keep the defendant for the sentence? And who got the opportunity to see the good opportunity, to see the ad for the good houses. So for those very important decisions, when the machine learnings are used to make those decisions, apparently there are ethical issues, right? So for example, when the algorithms are trained based on the data we collect from society. So is the individual privacy compromised? Right? When the decisions are made based on the population from multiple social groups. So are the decisions biased against certain social groups? Or is it okay for us to use some black box model to make decisions without any justifications? So they are all ethical issues, and luckily a lot of AI researchers, including myself, have made some effort toward building ethical AI algorithms. But many of them can be recast as this framework, that we try to find some machine learning model to maximize certain performance measure on the data we collected from the current population. subject to some social norm constraints, such as the fairness intervention constraint or the privacy constraint. But unfortunately, this framework somehow implicitly assumes that the society is static, right? We just collect this data from the current population. But it's really overlooked the downstream impact the machine learning algorithms can have on the society, right? So in fact, there has been abundant evidence showing that the algorithmic decisions can reshape our society. So here I will give you a simple example, right? So in the 1994, the government of Colombia initiated a social welfare program and tried to help the poor families. So the way to do this is to assign a poverty index score to each family based on some information such as annual income or the education. And they want to, so for those families whose poverty index score is below a threshold, they are eligible for this social program and they have some benefit. And so this is the score of the distribution of this poverty index score in 1994. But over the year, the people start to figure out how the decisions are made, and they start to adapt their behavior in a way to maximize their chance of being eligible for the social welfare program. So we can see that after 4 years, since after this initiation of this program, we can see that there is a really obvious shift in the distribution of the poverty index, and there is this discontinuity at the threshold. And 5 years later, we can see that most of the families become eligible for this social welfare. So this example simply states that the decisions can reshape the society, right? Reshape their score distribution. So this is just one example. So similarly, in the finance, the models that we use to predict the market actually can drive the evolution of the market. So this is a sentence that I quoted from the McKenzie and Milo. It says that the option pricing theory succeeded empirically, not because it discovered the pre-existing price patterns, but because once it was adopted, it pushed the market to conform to its predictions. Right? So it's really not the models work well, but it's really the moment that we start to deploy that model to make decisions, it drives the market to evolve in that way. So there are more examples of this. For example, this online recommendation system, right? So we receive a lot of recommendations every day on the digital market. So the content, which content you choose to show to the customer, it really steer their behavior and preference. And also in the traffic route navigating systems, the route prediction really affects the traffic conditions. And also the predictive policing models that you use to decide where to dispatch the police officer, it also affects the crime patterns. So with all of those examples, I just want to highlight that there is the algorithm decisions reshape the society, and the data what we collected from the society will be used for training the machine learning models. And really there is this feedback loop between the society and the machine learning. And there exists a lot of those algorithms that trained in the static framework without considering the downstream impact of learning algorithm on the society. They may have unexpected adverse impact. So I would like to highlight this risk of using this static framework using a very simple example. Okay. So actually this is a study conducted by the bunch of researchers in the Berkeley, and this paper won the best paper award in the SML conference. So if you are interested, I'd like to encourage you to take a look. So basically that they consider a landing scenario. Let's say we have the banker, we want to decide to distribute the fixed amount of loans to the different social groups. And let's say we have two social groups, blue group and the orange. And the one of those groups, let's say the blue group is disadvantaged or the protected group, in the sense that there are more higher proportion of people from that group cannot repay the loan. So they have the higher default rate. And so from the banker's perspective, we may want to make this algorithm ethical. Let's say we want to enforce some fairness constraints in the decision process. Let's say by equalizing the loan approval rate across two groups. So it sounds like that decisions are fair, right? Because we are offering more opportunity to the disadvantaged group by overissuing loans to them. But there's a consequence, is that we do not take into account the downstream impact of those fairness interventions. Because in practice, if we think about this downstream impact, the people who cannot repay the loan, what happens if we give the loan to them? Their credit score may drop, right? So that's the downstream impact that we want to consider here. That's the credit score of the individuals, they may drop if they receive the loan but they cannot repay. Or it will increase if they are able to repay the loan by receiving. So it turns out that although it seems that the lending decisions that were made are fair because we are over-issuing loan to the disadvantaged group, but because the majority of there are larger proportion of people from that group cannot repay the loan, so their future credit scores will drop. So the average scores from the disadvantaged group will drop, and the average score of the advantaged group will increase. So it shows that the risk of imposing the static fairness intervention of the society, right? It reinforces the social inequality, although that it seems that decisions are fair. So this is a very simple example. So that's also the key idea I want to make today. I want to highlight the risk of using the static notions of the social constraint, because they may be harmful, and also it's very important for us to take into account the social dynamics with developing ethical machine learning algorithms. So so just I want to say that there has been an ongoing effort on this direction, and I'm not going to talk about here because we only have 7 minutes, but some efforts, but we can see that it's really need an interdisciplinary effort from economics, social science, and even the human computer interaction. We need to really, when we build the machine learning algorithms, we really need to understand what are the downstream impact of the algorithms on the society. And this is currently that researchers have proposed some mathematical modeling approaches, and using the game theoretical models or conduct the real-time measurement to learn the dynamics from the real-time data. And they try to incorporate this in the learning when building the machine learning algorithms. And if you are interested, I would like to talk offline or in the panel discussion session. So that will be the talk today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the talk. And as we see here, in order to make these machine learning models fair for all these different social environments, we must be interdisciplinary. But I feel like interdisciplinary action applies to all sorts of innovation, right? In order to be innovative, in order to be the next big thing, you must collaborate. So I just want to take that message and make that clear as well. So as Juro mentioned, we'll be transitioning to our panel discussion next, but we'll pause for 2 minutes so we can get the stage set up. So we'll get that set up real quick and take a quick 2-minute break. Thank you.
You know what I'm saying? That's definitely something that it's a good example of inadvertent effects. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Must have been the game. Yeah. They're so good at driving. Yeah, but that's kind of like a no quality, right? Like people know that that's gonna happen. The other one is really interesting because you don't expect trying to create equity to actually increase inequality. I think it is a good, but it's a good point It's a good argument for racism. Mild racism. If inadvertent, and not, it's not racism. You know, I mean,
I don't know what the red. You could be mad at what. Do you default on what is here?
Someone said we left the target. I mean,
unless it's student loans. Those aren't. So what's the panel to talk about? You're 9 minutes.
That's a good question. Oh, I think it's it's the speakers. Except that one guy that helped us. Yeah, that was yeah.
It's not.
Hello, are we on?
Stop on the booth and listen to me about. No, they're, they must be help.
Okay, hey, everyone. Yes, this is on. We're gonna get started with the panel. So, I have a couple prepared questions, for the panel, and then would love to open it up, to other questions that folks have. But first, you know, we've had, some amazing talks, and so we've gotten to know, two of our other speakers here, but wanted you to also, meet our third panelist. Super, and so if you want to give your kind of quick intro, as well, then we can launch into the panel.
Sounds great. Everyone, great to be here. Really cool projects out there. So cool to meet a bunch of you. I'm Super Son. I go by Super. I work at a company called Upstart that's in town. We build AI models for underwriting for consumer lending. So a lot of what you covered in your presentation struck home. I was a Buckeye, did a startup out of Ohio State, and then have been in product management thereafter. So I work with their capital supply teams there. And Upstart, we've done about 35 billion in loans. We mostly focus on personal loans, auto, HELOC, and really we're dealing with these sort of ethical considerations all the time when we look at new data sets. So excited to talk to you all.
Awesome. So let's get started. So, you know, we talked, there's a lot of, in the presentations, and I think as we're thinking about things, there's a lot of ways that technology can go an unintended place, pretty quickly. And you kind of don't know in some of those instances until maybe you put a little bit of it out there. But Mika, you kind of spoke to a little bit of like what you can do to, while things are actually out in the world, to be asking yourself the questions, that awareness point that you had mentioned. But, you know, would love to hear from you about how do you kind of think about the ethical components while you're trying to build and move fast? How do you balance the two?
Well, so balance is always tricky. Like I said, there are basic things you're gonna be thinking about, like where is my data coming from? Or who do I envision using this product, that are going to shape your ethical kind of path towards whatever you're doing. Having some of those people, or you know, in the room with you, or having sources for how those kinds of people, your customers, your data contributors, and the rest of the ecosystem that you're dealing with, can help you to anticipate some kinds of issues that might arise, right? If you are interested in speech, it helps to know that people speak different languages or have different accents beforehand, and a speech professional can tell you that. If you're interested in faces, look in your image data set. In one famous image data set that Tim Geber did a paper on a few years ago, there were hardly any dark-skinned people, especially dark-skinned women. And there were like 4,000 like photos of George W. Bush. Right, so these things come from the data, and some awareness of what's in the black box is something you really owe yourself to see these things come.
I totally agree with that. I'll add to that, you made a point in the presentation that this is something you need to build in from the start, and a consideration of not something you tack on at the end. And so in a business context, sort of from day one, the same way we have thought about profitability is important, just like it is for any business. We have also thought about fairness and outcomes that we have being equally important and building in those systems from day one. So when we try to move as quickly as we can, just like, any fast growing company does. But as we do that, we have built mechanisms that is just part of the process where in an automated way, we are testing the impact on disparate groups, we're testing new model updates. And it is at a point now where essentially it is, it's an automated process. So we're not going out of our way to do these one-off spot tests. It's baked in before any new model update goes out. I think building it in from the start takes a little more effort, but then compounds and yields a lot of benefits over time. And make sure you don't get in trouble with regulators too.
Well, kind of a little bit of a follow-up to that. How do you, sometimes someone could feel like making the ethical choice or making, the choice to, hey, I'm gonna slow down a little bit, I'm gonna think a little bit harder, or I'm gonna go get an additional data set that's gonna be more expensive. It's going to require more resources. And a competitor or another company is not doing that. Or you're just seeing generally the other folks around you are maybe not making those same moves, and you feel like it's a little bit of, well, I need to get out there quickly. And you have a little bit of like that tension. Like, do you have a perspective on kind of like how you would deal, again, I think a lot of these things are tensions, right?
Yeah, maybe 3 points that come to mind is 1, regulatory, 2, the values of the actual organization, and 3, the idea that those 2 do not have to always be in conflict.
Mhm.
So the first one, in industries like lending, insurance, healthcare, there's a lot of legislation that already exists out there that does this to make sure that there is not a company that goes rogue and is, getting extra profits at the expense of certain groups. So I don't think all of the regulations that we have are helpful or are apt anymore today, but there's a lot out there, at least in lending, that is really, really good and is poorly rooted on whatever technology you use. The outcome has to match up and make sure that you're not disproportionately impacting any one group over another. And the second point, I think, is just coming to the company's values, where a company needs to care and prioritize this. So I don't have any opinions on how, as a government, they might be able to legislate that better. But for all of you in here, as you're starting companies or ideas or places that you go work at, this is something that you should bring to the table. And if you truly do care about the outcome and the ethical impact of your work, that's something that, when you're starting a project from day one, you should be introducing, just like you would introduce any other KPI or metric that you're measuring for success criteria. So I think it really comes down to the people that are working on it and then their mission. And third thing is, I think it doesn't always have to be in conflict. We've seen this many times where we, and in fact, we don't ship a model unless it either is just as good on impact and preventing causes or better, and then also has positive business impact. So finding ways where you can get both, I think definitely possible.
I don't know beyond that, actually, I think that regulation, legislation actually is really, as I mentioned in my talk, I think is really the interdisciplinary effort. It really needs this regulation. I think that what's missing there, I think, is that, for example, in this fairness concept, there are lots of notions of fairness. But I think that the law, there is not specified that which notion of fairness you need to use when developing the technologies. So I think that it's a joint effort from the multiple parties, and I think that's necessary to help us to balance on whether we just need to invest on only the technology to get the profit, or to develop this ethics.
Yeah, if I could ask you to take the startup cap off for a second. We are the best people to be ambassadors for our discipline. A lot of the time, the people who are thinking about these legislative solutions, which I agree are completely necessary, have no idea what we do or how it works. And that's dangerous. So, the part of your brain that isn't trying to get your startup off the ground, should think, we are well placed to educate the people who are going to make the rules we will follow.
And one kind of, there's a couple themes I think that keep rising, lots of them actually. But one of them is also, there's the data that goes in, which I would like to talk about. And then there's also how you are able to notice that something is happening and that there is something that you should be looking into. like, what are your thoughts or tips or advice about how you approach actually being able to look, you've now shipped something, you have something out there, something is working. How can you start to look at it about whether or not it's actually coming to unintended outcomes? You know, you had the lending example. There's a particular time frame where actually you were able to see, hey, and then this happened. But how can you actually look at whether it's qualitative or quantitative data to be consistently keeping a pulse on it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, to be honest, I don't have the solutions for now, but I think the keep conducting this real-time measurement is necessary, right? To understand in the lending examples, to understand whether there has been a distribution shift in the people's credit scores, and what are the impact after we deploy the product, right? I think I don't have a solution for now, but I think that's a very good question.
I think one way that we think about it, at least as a company, is and both of you actually touched on this in your presentations. You have to start with defining what you believe fairness is and understand that criteria before you can evaluate if it's happening or not. So in the lending example, for example, if we just gave everybody a loan at the same exact interest rate, you actually have negative impacts on almost everybody except a tiny sliver where that interest rate really represents their default risk. Everyone that you gave a worse rate to is self-rate because they're paying extra interest. Everyone you gave a better rate to than they can have all of the challenges that we heard earlier, where your credit score gets worse, you get debt that you can't afford, it puts you in sort of this cycle of debt that's not good for anybody. So we sort of define it and look at it in our example as what are the outcomes for various protected groups or classes, however you want to measure that, and getting the data of what's happening in the country today. And then every single time we have a model update, we just say, is it better or is it worse? So you can't really have a benchmark which is perfection. Like we would love to get there, we want to get there over time, but can we improve the status quo a little bit with each time we update the model? And we've had model updates where, you know, our engineers were building a new model, much better outcome, higher conversion rate expectation with lower APRs, but it has a negative impact on some classes. So we basically go back to the drawing board and say, nope, that doesn't work. And we'll just rework that until we can actually meet that criteria. And I think your point earlier about regulation is so right. It's like, it's really difficult to reconcile some of the regulatory concerns with business needs. Like, for example, you know, the CFPB, which is a legislative body or a government body that legislates the industry, they have expectations for measuring outcomes on, let's say, certain demographics by race or by gender, but we are not legally allowed to collect that information up front. So when we're evaluating that post facto, how are we going to measure and say, okay, were African Americans impacted worse than the general population? Or is there a disparate impact on women versus men? Well, if you don't know that up front and you can't use that to make sure that you're testing it properly, how can you measure it on the other side? So these kind of real world, I think, challenges there's no easy answer, but needs to be worked through.
Yeah, I totally. Also, I want to emphasize that there is also a challenge is that there is the data that we can get is partial, right? You never know that whether a person is going to default or repay the loan if you do not issue. So that makes it even more challenging to understand what's going on, right?
Right. I think it goes back to your point as well, Mika, about it's all about responsibility. You're also the one that then is seeing that this can happen or some other unintended consequences happened, and if we kind of think about it as there would be blanket rules from any place, it's going to be really hard for that to first cover everything, but then also allow for innovation at the same time. Want to also make sure that we leave time for any audience questions. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask the panelists? Yes.
This might be a little more complex, but I know that you talked about static indicators, some problems with static indicators, right? What happens when ethics will change over time? What happens when economic indicators become economic vindicators by policymakers and corporations or other institutions?
Yes. So that's a very good question. So of course that everything that when you develop algorithms, everything you need to consider is in a dynamic setting, right? Not just the notion should be the static, So actually, I didn't really emphasize is that really we need this dynamic notions of the social norm constraint, right? The fairness is not just you simply equalize the loan approval rate, right? You need to consider what's the downstream impact. And I think that's really also an ongoing research, actually try to figure out what is the correct, the better, the social fairness constraint. For example, try how to collect, how do you propose this fairness constraint from the human feedback or the dynamic or the social dynamics or the environmental dynamics. That's a very challenging problem, to be honest. And I don't, right now it's ongoing research, and also there is no correct solution for that. But I think that it's important that everyone need to know that there is a need for the dynamic notions of fairness constraint or the other social norms constraint.
I'm gonna ask another question and then would love more audience questions. When we talk about the data, that is like, where is the data coming from? That also seems like it's becoming an increasingly complex question, as some of the data ends up being generated from other models, and I imagine that'll kind of keep compounding on itself. Are there ways that, like, when you think about that as a problem, any things that come to mind? I mean, it's a very complex question, and you know, the question isn't like, how would you solve this problem? But as we're starting to think through how we could think about that problem, do you have any kind of thoughts to share on those?
You're absolutely right that as I think we've all been talking about, models have a tendency to create their own reality, and these days, models that generate text or images are increasingly being used to create training data for more specialized models that understand text or images, which can create these same kind of feedback loops that we see in more traditional allocative settings like predictive policing or giving loans. As you just said, the person you don't give a loan to, you'll never find out whether they're a default risk or not. I think that honestly, that can be really dangerous and can freeze historical patterns in place. Although it is very tempting to get something off the ground very fast using synthetic data, I think that at least for testing or tuning, there really is no substitute for real data collected in the deployment environment. I think that anything that you use for model training that can get your model, gets you another couple of points on a properly designed suite of metrics, which can include fairness metrics, is legitimate to use. So if you want to create a whole database of faces and train your face recognizer on it, or a whole database of buildings and train your search and rescue robot to fly through them, that's all good. But when you start testing in these settings, and then you say, well, we're going to deploy models that fly through these artificial buildings correctly, or recognize these artificial people correctly. That's when I think you run the risk that there are segments of the population that do this.
Maybe one thing I'll add is, for all the reasons you're pointing out, that the data is messy, it's disparate, it's not clear to access. Even looking at something like credit reports, there's tons of issues there. You can believe like how unreliable they are and just all the issues you have there. The flip side of that is, if you're starting a company here, that could be a core advantage for your business. Is if you are the entity that can get that data into a spot where you have high data integrity and trust, and you have a proprietary data set, that represents a huge value for that enterprise. And so all that effort can end up being worth it. I think you're right. It's very important to make sure that you're not just calcifying any existing discrimination or past patterns that showed up in the data. And so it's sort of on us to come up with creative ways to get out of that. So some of it is testing, some of it is running experiments. So like we have a program where we will, if the model outputs for a small percentage of population that applies and they get a decline output, we will actually still give them a loan And then if they do default, we will help them get back to current because that was our fault. But if they don't, you now have new data that lets you know this person actually was credit worthy. The model thought otherwise. What did we miss there? And or becomes new training data that we have that no one else out there does. So I think it's sort of a combination effort there.
And that piece that you mentioned, and you both touched on was like that, you have the option of the synthetic data or also actually then the proprietary data, which can become a huge asset if you're able to build that up and use that kind of as a core part, but something to also think about as you're, leveraging anything that might be utilizing AI or, that inevitably will become a key part of the business or anything that you're building is data. How can that also potentially be, something that is a driver for the ethical tech, but also a moat around your business, potentially as well. Are there any other audience questions? Yes.
Okay, so my question is basically, now that you say you know that we need more. Stated earlier, like how do we create research and projects that inspire for this in the research within the product? Because oftentimes we say like there's a problem, but monitors don't know. So like how do we bridge that gap in our research projects?
And so just to make sure that I'm gonna restate the question correctly, with the research, getting that type of, so you've mentioned civic engagement around it, about, hey, here's what we're actually finding. Here, these are really important things to be taken into account and get to that visibility.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this isn't something I'm an expert on, but I mean, I guess we're all up here doing science communication and outreach now. I would say look at people who are on bigger stages than this one and see what they're doing right. And my experience with those people is that in addition to being talented public speakers with the backing of high prestige organizations, a lot of these people are or know how to talk to artists. So I mean, this is probably not coming as a surprise to you, the one person with an art startup. For instance, people like Joy Buolamwini, who have been very influential in profile of racism in tech and in machine learning, is not only a gifted technologist, but also someone, with the white mask that she wore to make her face recognizer actually see her after training on biased training data, who was able to create kind of unforgettable images. I think, the thesis would have been the thesis without that mask, but it wouldn't have gotten into the New York Times. Science communication is important, and that's a skill that can be learned and practiced.
One other question might be, how about when you're trying to train an AI, how about accounting for things like open source? How to kind of bring up some earlier points, you don't know what's going to be created. As William Gibson, the founder of Cyberpunk, wrote, the street finds its own uses for things. How much should that affect your decision? And to what points might you also figure the good uses for things that might not be useful? I guess it's more like an exercise in hyperstition with the classical sense. But how do you turn what you want into what is real? How do you proactively guide something's adaptation? Make sure to maximize the good parts, minimize the bad parts.
Well, this is actually something I gave a lecture on in class this morning, so it's hilarious, and I'm gonna try and resuscitate my notes before handing off the mic. But there are two notions of democracy that are important here, but that conflict. One idea of democracy is that tech is democratic when everyone gets to decide how to use it. The other is that that technology is democratic when we decide as a society how people can use it. And these two ideas are going to go head to head places, because if everyone gets to make their own decisions, then we don't get to, make social decisions about what's going to be there and what's not going to be there. The open source movement is very much about individual freedom and letting the street do whatever it's going to do. I believe that that is important for reasons of transparency. But I don't believe that you should open source the latest, biggest, shiniest model without thinking about its dual use implications. Maybe keep that behind your paywall for a while, figure out what the street is going to pay you to do with it, and then see whether you can or cannot release it into the wild. I don't see a way to cater to both of those impulses at once as much as we'd like to.
Yeah, I certainly don't have a good answer for this. I hope I understand your question correctly, but I think with all these new technologies, any company or any of you as you're creating them can only come up with so many permutations, maybe the first, second, third order effects, but you're not going to get them all. So I think it's really best effort that you really truly have to care about thinking on what the externalities are that you talked about, or the impact that it may have in the use case you can think of. At the end of the day, let's be honest, we don't know what the next version of a generative AI model is going to be doing, or how it's going to impact healthcare or finance or any of these areas. All we can do is try to shore up downsides that we know will come up, and then monitor as we go to make sure we're addressing them on an ongoing basis. I tend to lean free market, so I'm more on the, you kind of have to throw it out there, give it your best effort, see what happens, and then mitigate as you go. And then hopefully in areas where there's large impacts to populations or externalities that companies won't care about, that's when the government can intelligently step in and help, but really as a reaction to technology once it's adopted, not preempting and trying to say, you can't do this or you can't do that, before we really know what the upside could be from some of these new things.
Yeah, I think it sounds like there's a couple of touch points on there too, that the unintended pieces can also be positive. We can also see it kind of go either direction, and that actually then people start using your product or that service or that thing in a way that it actually tangibly kind of helps as well. And those are important pieces of stories, pieces of data to be able to look at and adjust to too. So I want to be mindful of time. How are we doing on time?
One more audience question.
Okay, one more audience question. Yes.
So when you're testing these models out in the wild, how do you determine what are, we're talking about static versus dynamic kind of environments, how do you determine what are effects caused by the model versus other external variables? For example, with the Columbia example that you gave, how do you decide if that distribution shift was caused by the modeling or by some other effects in something?
That's a very good question. Yeah, actually that because so in terms of the research, actually what you are saying, we call it the endogenous shift or the exogenous shift. Whether it is the reason of this distribution shift is caused by the model itself, the deployment of the model, or it's naturally exist. So that's a very good question. In order to distinguish that, you may first have some prior knowledge about this environmental dynamics. So, for example, we know that how the data may evolve naturally without the intervention of the model. So in that case, the causal modeling, the people have been using the causal modeling to distinguish the exogenous shift or the endogenous shift. I think that's one approach that maybe we can consider. Again, I think the real-time method collects a lot of data. That's very important. Or you have some prior knowledge. That's a very challenging problem. Also a active research area, if you want to say, yeah. But I don't have the standard solution for that. But that's a very good point.
I will say, I mean, this is an OSU hackathon. No one here is CEO of Twitter yet. At least I don't see the CEO of Twitter in the audience. You can do experiments that assume that you don't have country controlling market share, right? For a normal thing, just do A/B testing. You're going to roll out your model. You want to see what it does. Make half your customers use it and half your customers don't use it. Come back in a month, see who's doing okay, and if it works the way you want it, then roll it out over everyone. And if it doesn't, it and make everyone go back to the old one. Causal modeling is important if you're gonna run the entire economy in Colombia, but none of us are that lucky.
I wanted to add on one other thing I've also seen, because you're asking a little bit about like how you can know what is causing that piece of that data. And sometimes, I feel like I've been in situations where the entire room came to, oh, X happened because of Y, because you just dug into one metric there. And there's this framework of like the 5 whys, and ask yourself 5 times, okay, this happened, X happened, why did it happen? And see if you can keep applying, well, why did that happen? To keep drilling down further and further, because sometimes where you're starting is still at the symptoms. And each of them is a symptom of this underlying cause, but you have to keep kind of digging down. And I think that's also kind of comes from, there can be an inertia around that. That can also feel like it can be distracting when you're talking to the team, or, hey, we need to move on, we need to move, here, like, it's very obvious. But if you know, or kind of feel like, hey, there's something off here, and that's, I think, what a lot of these examples get you to is it starts to build up that gut feeling and that spidey sense around, hey, actually, no, this doesn't seem right. I'm gonna keep pushing a bit. So thank you so much for your time, your insights. This was really wonderful. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
A very engaging panel. Thank you to everyone. Now the moment that you all have been waiting for, the announcement of the Buckeye Choice Award winners. Regardless of the results, I'd like to take a moment to express our gratitude to all the table presenters who have shared their innovative ideas and hard work at ShowOHI. Your dedication is truly commendable. To our winners, please come to the stage to be recognized and receive the award. And to present the award, I'd like to also invite OHI alumni, our group here. Please come on the stage and give the award. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Hello. My name is Caitlin Horn. I am an alumni of OHIO and of the Ohio State University, and I'm so pleased to be here with you all this evening to kind of chat and celebrate. It has been so wonderful to see all of the presentations outside. And I also just want to mention that I'm also the president of the alumni of OHIO. We seek to network with each other as alumni, as well as with current students. And so, yeah, I just want to go ahead and announce the winners of the Buckeye Choice Awards. Okay, so first I'll start with the runner-up. Oh, I'm sorry. Advance the slide. Advance the slide. Okay, great. Here we go. Okay. So, yep, you're right. No problem. Yeah. Anyway, I work a remote job, so this is a lot of. But anyway, yeah. So I want to go ahead and announce the runner-up, which will be the BioAid Emergency Navigator. Okay, congratulations to that team. And next we will move on to the first place, which goes to Solstice Outreach. one of our team members is out there. We're bringing him in right now. I really enjoyed your presentation. Yeah, thank you. All the best. Also, shout out to Audit, because if you didn't come to us in the Keaton Center and tell us to come here, we wouldn't be here. Shout out. Thank you all so much for attending this evening, and it's.
I have like one or two more.
Yes, okay. Sorry, yes, okay, thank you so much.
Really isn't much, but I just wanted to quickly share the avenues to connect with OHIO. So if you're interested in maybe sponsoring or volunteering with your org as a professional, right? We always have spots for industry professionals and prominent volunteers, mentors, and judges in our various hackathons. Please connect with connect.osu.edu. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, we'll have a mailing list. So please join that to be notified. And then our social media handle is @HackOhio. We're really close to 1,000 followers on Instagram. So I think by the end of tonight, you'll get to 1,000. I'd be really happy to hit that. And then just a final thank you. I mean, as the evening ends and as ShowOHI comes to end, I urge everyone in the audience to just take a moment to pause and reflect. Look back at the connections you made at the show tonight and the insights that were shared during the lightning talks, and apply this all to your future endeavors. To our table presenters, know that OHIO, the resource tables at ShowOHIO, and the Ohio State community here have your back and will support you in your entrepreneurial endeavors. Everything is simply just one ask away. With that, thank you all for attending ShowOHIO, and goodbye.